if that's working. But anyway, here we go. Oh, the good old days. I remember growing up. There were no mobile phones when I grew up. If I wanted to make a phone call, I had to go indoors and find that weird-looking thing with a long curly cord and dial, a little dial that you used to spin with your finger. Remember dialing 000? How difficult that was? You had to wait to come back every time. Watching TV was a challenge too. There was no remotes in those days. You had to do that kind of weird shuffle from the couch. You'd kind of get up and sort of shuffle over, push the button, and shuffle back to the couch. My favourite TV show used to come around once a week. When I got my first computer and connected it to the internet for the first time, it made that funny sound. Many of you might remember that in this room, the old dial-up connection, that ring, ring, ring noise, if you remember that. The scary thing was, though, that was only 30, 40 years ago, not that long ago. Makes me wonder and think about what my children and the youngsters of today will be saying in 30 or 40 years' time. I remember when we grew up, we used to have to carry that phone around in our pocket. If you dropped it and the screen broke, you had to go to the supermarket area and find one of those little kiosks and hopefully you could fix your screen. My e-scooter could only do 70 kilometers before I had to recharge it. Or how about, I remember Mom and Dad had to actually drive the car. We used to have to put this stuff called diesel in. I used to hate the smell of diesel. Or probably the most interesting one would be, remember that time Dad took us camping and oh my God, there was no internet. How terrible was that? Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Anton Kroger. I'm the Vice President for Natural Resources at SAP. Many of you, like me, might sometimes wake up in the morning and wonder if the world has gone nuts. It would seem that the greatest issue or the great difficulty of our time is that the future arrives before most people are even ready for it. How many of you might feel that way today? Any takers in the room? Yeah, there's a few. Well, you'll be glad to know you're not alone, because Arnold Toynbee back in the 1950s felt exactly the same way. So perhaps you're thinking, well, this is not a new issue. We've been feeling like this for a long time. Has anything really changed? And I would advocate that actually a lot has changed. If we look at the last 40, 50 years, our population has gone from about 3.7 billion people in the 1970s to about 8 billion people today. That is 4 billion more mouths to feed, people to clothe, homes to build, people to consume the resources that we deliver every day. If we think about the number of minds that adds to the world, these are minds that have different opinions, polarized views, but they're also minds that can think about technology and start to build the future. Supply chains have become global by nature in order to provide the resources that these people need. These global supply chains are complex and highly fragile, as we've seen from recent global events. The focus on environmental ESG is starting to heat up. Climate change is still at center stage, in my opinion, and we are trying to rally the world behind a common goal. It's not as easy as we think. While everyone kind of agrees, the reality is it's same, but slightly different. And in the business context, that introduces a lot of complexities. If you look at ESG regulations, while there's a common thread, every country has a slightly different variation of the same thing, which means as an organization, as a business, you need to know what those differences are, because if you don't, you can end up in a lot of trouble. If you get into the world of chemicals, pharmaceuticals, this challenge becomes ever more complex. The speed of technology is still growing exponentially. So if you think about the time it took us to go from the first flight to man on the moon, that was only about 70 years. The time it took us to get a website on a mobile phone was about 20 years. And the time it took AI to go from a niche project in a development lab to mainstream adoption was 5 years. This technology is growing exponentially. And while Moore's law, in terms of physical compute capacity, is slowing down, the reality is the algorithmic capacity is still growing faster than ever. Our cognitive, emotional, and social frameworks aren't tuned for hypergrowth. They're tuned for stability. It's a small incremental change. The half-life of knowledge is shrinking. A skill learned today is probably going to be obsolete in about 3 to 5 years' time. This mismatch creates what sociologists call future shock. That's the psychological and social stress caused by this mismatch in rapid change. Ironically, it's a concept that was coined in the 1970s by a guy called Alvin Toffler, but perhaps more relevant today than ever before. AI, robotics, automation are starting to replace and reshape millions of jobs faster than education and policy can adapt. Humans are processing exponentially more data than ever before, but yet our attention span and ability to make decisions on that data hasn't evolved at the same rate. Technology often outpaces our moral and regulatory frameworks, which has an implication on ethics if you consider things like AI bias or gene editing as examples. However, as we've illustrated, humans are highly adaptive creatures. The advantage now, and one might argue, is that AI has almost arrived at the perfect time, where we can start to augment human capacity with a capacity for new technology to help us in doing what we need to do. So things have changed quite dramatically for SAP as well. We started life in 1972. So back in 1972, we had one customer. We used to enter data via punch cards, and we operated at, I wouldn't even say kilobyte scale. Today, our customers account for about 84% of the global economy. We have 425,000 customers in 180 different countries, and we have close to 300 million cloud users on our network today. I think this is a vision that none of our founders would ever have imagined back in 1972. But it's not only our business that's evolved. For many of you in this room, and for in the greater hall outside, perhaps this is your reality. Today, we produce parts in Vietnam with materials sourced from China. That might be financed out of Singapore or the Cayman Islands. Your products are reported under the EU taxonomy in Frankfurt, and we have to certify our carbon footprint in Sydney. I'm sure many of you have a slight variation on that. The reality, though, is this complexity is not a problem to eliminate. It's just the new physics of business. So how is SAP helping customers manage this highly complex world? Well, for a start, we put data back at the center of our architecture. With our Business Data Cloud, it means that you can bring all your business data into one central environment and manage that with a common semantic layer and a knowledge graph ready for AI adoption. That is closely integrated and coupled with our well-known business processes sitting around the outside, interconnected, which allows you to run business processes right across your business through finance, through HR, through supply chain, procurement, maintenance, and your customer world. But as companies, we don't operate alone. So another big part of our architecture is actually how we help connect you with other companies across our business network, which connects things like commerce through purchasing arrangements, supply chains, sustainability data, and maintenance data. And in the future, this will be even more tightly connected with AI agents, which will allow you to do things you were never able to do before. Our ecosystem is changing too. So the reality is we cannot do this alone. And the speed at which the technology is evolving means we need to be partnered with all the major tech vendors out there. Because as a business user, you just want to use the best algorithms. You don't necessarily want to have to figure out what to use. And so as SAP, those partnerships enable that to be consumed seamlessly to you as a business user. So for many of you in the room, you'll be looking at this going, oh, that's kind of futuristic. Not sure I'm there yet. The great thing about cloud is that this is now accessible to smaller and smaller companies. If you were to ask me today, how long does it take to implement SAP? I would say the good benchmark at the moment is probably about 3 months. If you'd asked me that question last year, I would have said 6 months. And if you'd asked me that question a year before last, I would have said 12 months. Our bottleneck is no longer the technology, it's the people to actually absorb and adopt the technology that's the problem. You might also think, well, that's kind of futuristic, AI bots and the not. You know, that's a bit like Captain Kirk talking to the Starship Enterprise. Well, guess what? That reality is already here. The new interface is something called Joule. We no longer have to navigate to a screen. We can simply talk to it in natural language. So for example, I might want to know a little bit more about a piece of equipment. I can just ask the system in simple, normal language to tell me a little bit about specific equipment. And there it tells me it's a conveyor in plant 1710 and it needs bearings and seals. I might want to follow that question up and say, well, what's the stock level for these bearings and seals? And the answer is contextualized back to that plant. So it's not giving you the stock level across the company, it's telling you how much is in that plant because it knows the context of the question that you're asking. So there's 5. It's not about information, it's also about how do I get the system to execute tasks. So I might want to reserve some stock for a particular maintenance activity. So again, I don't need to navigate somewhere else. I can just simply ask it, like the Starship Enterprise, to reserve some stock. It does take a little while sometimes. There it is. Another common challenge that I see is if we're trying to find information, we've got tons of information everywhere, unstructured data, manuals to explain how to run maintenance. With AI grounding, we can throw all those manuals into big pots and just ask it, how do I service this conveyor? And it gives you a summarized answer. If I want to click on the link, it'll take me straight to the manual and I can see exactly in the manual what it's talking about. If I don't speak English, it doesn't matter either. I can talk to Jill in multiple different languages. Let's try Russian, for example. And you'll see that it gives me the same answer, but only in Russian. So one of the topics of the conference has been permits. So permits, by definition, are fairly complex documents and fairly serious documents that you really need to read, understand, and take action on. Otherwise, you may not be compliant with the obligations under a permit. With our AI in our new EHS environmental solution, it means you can upload a permit. It will extract the relevant information about the permit, push that straight into your business system, and then it'll help you read the permit and determine what are the tasks I need to stay on top of to remain compliant. But what about new users? So quite often when I talk to companies, they say, oh, you know, we're hiring a bunch of new guys, or I have users that don't use the system very often, they can't remember how to use it. Well, now we can again layer on a little bit of extra technology to make that process a lot simpler. In fact, we can even automate how you enter information onto those screens. So let's take an example. I need to raise a purchase order. The process starts with a simple wizard. It asks you some basic questions in normal language, Because really what it's trying to do is get you to this correct starting screen without you having to even find it. You can then automate that process to the extent they'll even fill in the information for you on the screen because it's contextually aware of who you are and what you're doing. It'll only stop to ask you for information when it needs information from the human. At any point in time, you still have the option to edit anything on the screen. It doesn't take your ability to do that away. But you can see the speed at which I can now enter information into a system and execute what I call a pretty standard business process. It's also got some other key interesting features. So for example, if I'm completed my purchase order and I need to add comments, again, I can simply type that in. But the problem with comments is we tend to be lazy and we like to enter as little as possible, which doesn't often help the next person who's coming along reading those comments. So now with AI, it'll tell me, hang on, that comment is not particularly useful. How about we enhance it with a bit more information to give the next guy some more context? So these are just examples of how these systems are designed to make your job as a business user so much easier. Our customers are starting to adopt this at pace and at scale. So skills was another topic that was talked about at the conference. We have a customer called Hydro. They are one of the world's largest producers of sustainable aluminium. They're using AI to predict the skills of the future, then looking at their own skills and using that difference in information to design training programs and identify people in their organization to cross-train and upskill to get ready for their future world. Turns out AI is also not necessarily only good at natural language, it's very good at coding too. Lion, who's one of the major beverage makers in Australia, use AI to actually develop applications and has dropped the cycle time for new applications in their business from months to weeks. So, in closing, the reality is our future is only going to become more complex. This is our opportunity to embrace that complexity as a catalyst to think about how we drive change into our organizations. Let's leverage these business systems to do that. And together, we can build a future with intelligence and purpose. Thank you very much. If you'd like to find out more about what SAP can do and how we can help you, we are out the back. You'll see it right as you come in, the SAP Combi, right just near the entrance. And if you're interested in having a little bit of fun, we can turn you into an AI superhero just for today. Thank you very much.